Three, two, one. Boom. What's going on, YouTube land, fellow traders, gamers, video enthusiasts, anybody else who just happened to stumble by my content here? I'm putting out 2025, getting ramped up here for a really good year. Turned 50 in December, so 2025 I have a lot of things I want to accomplish before then, kind of like a midlife crisis. So first thing is I'm going to go ahead and pop this video out there on the YouTube lands. In other words, I'm going to make my chair a little more comfortable. In other words, 2025 I'm going to try to put more content out there to help new traders out. And I think one of the first areas, as the title suggests, is let's discuss gaps and how gaps can be one of the most powerful tool that you can have in your arsenal as far as a new retail trader. Now, once again, I am not a professional trader. I am a retail trader like everybody else, just trying to get ahead. I've turned my focus over the last couple months to futures, and I am beginning my own one-on-one coaching with a mentor of mine that I've been associated with in Team Alpha for a number of months to increase my chance of success. In other words, I have a 80 to 90% success rate on my trades, but I tend to not hold my winners long enough, and I leave money on the table. Green is still green, but green can be greener. But with that being said, let's dive right into it. Now, I do have ADHD, so I don't do a whole lot of pre-planning, but I try to get these charts up here a little bit organized before we get into it. And what is a gap? Gap is any time that there is a fluctuation in price, either up or down during the extended or pre-market hours, that creates a gap in daily. Let's take a look at it. Back in this is August 15th or so, August 14th or so. You can see on a daily there was a gap between the close of one day and the open of the next day. But what happened right before the market opened, the price just took off. What is this? What is this? Depending on where it started from, we went back to like the 5-minute chart or something like that. I mean, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5 points, 6 points or so in a matter inside of a 1 hour candle. That's a pretty good jump. So we got this gap here. Now, why is that important? There's a philosophy, there is a psychological power in trading. In other words, trading is just a lot of rinse and repeat. Traders are very habit creatures. In other words, we look for patterns and we trade within those patterns. Well, over the course of 100 years or however long the stock market's been in existence, there's certain patterns. And gaps are one of the most powerful ones because there's a philosophy. Gaps always get filled. Now, I'm not saying a minor gap will always get filled, but there's this psychological philosophy out there that gaps get filled. And as you can see, this one here, we gapped up, looked like it was racing another rally. Of course, you can say we got double top here. There's another pattern, and it came back down. Well, what it did, it filled this gap. In other words, it dropped at least to the bottom, or if not lower than the beginning of the gap. And this can be up or down. Like we said, if this is a gap up and this is a gap down, the exact same thing. We have several gaps down here, and eventually the price comes up and fills those gaps. Now, let's fast forward, let's find another gap. So here's what perfect example here, and we're going to really talk into this huge gap that we have at we really haven't filled 100% yet. Where are we at here? Let me zoom out some here. Let's find, nope, where we're at. There we go. These two gaps here. Now there's a more recent gap that we just filled. In other words, this was December or so, no, 11/14 or so. There's kind of a gap down here. 11/14, there's a gap down. We filled that gap, and then coming back down. In other words, there's some gaps here. Big gap. This is a presidential gap. During the presidential elections, a lot of the future traders were trading futures, and futures kind of correlate with either the ES or the NASDAQ. In other words, this is SPY. SPY kind of correlates with ES futures, and your QQQs, your Qs correlate with your NASDAQ, your NQs futures. So we use the SPY and the QQ to kind of plot out what our futures are going to do, the ES and the NQ. Well, during the presidential elections, we're trading futures. And as you can see, there was a huge run up. I mean, even on the 1 hour, you don't even see it. It freaking happens so fast. I don't know if I screw my charts up here. I try to go into like the 5-minute chart. I have to try to find it here again. I think that's the most recent price action. Come on, where are you at, dog? Yeah, see, and I'm not organized at all. Where are we at? 220. Oh, there's the big one we're going to talk about here in a little bit. Come on, where you at, dog? Where you at, dog? 1120. This is a purple line, right? Here we go. This is a purple line. You can see, even during the 5-minute, it spiked up so freaking hard. Why is that? Well, because our futures market took off so fast that, first off, stock market responds off news. Negative, positive, doesn't matter. It's just the interpretation of how the traders interpret it. Well, they interpreted the election night as being good for the stock market, or they had already predestined it to going to be determined no matter who won or lost. That doesn't really matter. It's just how the traders interpret it. So they interpreted it as being positive, so we just started pushing the freaking futures market up. Well, because the futures, ES and NQ, are so high up, when the SPY and the QQs opened up, they opened up with this huge gap. And depending on where you mark the gap at, I say with the open or whatever, we got this huge gap. I say all gaps tend to get filled. Well, we've already filled this small one here. But unfortunately, we haven't filled this presidential gap all the way yet. Let's go over here where we're at. I think this is 8-1. And we got to get. Sorry about that, guys. Come back over here. Actually, there we go, right here. This big red day here. CPI report. In other words, once a quarter or so, Feds come out and they talk about the state of the economy, interest rates, inflation, are they going to cut rates? Are they going to increase the rates? How many rate cuts are going to be next year? Well, as Powell began to speak about 2 o'clock, there was this little indecision in the way he was talking. In other words, and the market began to interpret it as negative. And in my opinion, they were going, the market makers, we call them market makers, they manipulate the market or so for liquidity purposes. There's plenty more videos out there that explains market makers. But in my opinion, they had predetermined that they were going to use the CPI report. CPI? It's not CPI. Shoot. I'm going to have to Google that. I think I might be using the wrong term here. FOMC. Sorry, but not CPI. FOMC meeting. Well, Powell began to speak on the FOMC. Oh, sorry about it. Like I said, I'm not scripted. I'm just winging it. But I knew I was wrong. Anyways, he began to speak, and the market began to tank, began to dump. And even though it was a pretty drastic drop from where we at 604 down to 584 or so, that's pretty freaking crazy. Less than 3% or so. So they were careful to drop it, but not hit any circuit breakers. In other words, halt the market or so. So what happens? Kind of come up a little bit on the after hours, and then the next day we dumped again. So we are clearly inside this gap. So if I go here and put a box here, you can see we are clearly inside this gap. So with that being said, we have not really completely filled that gap yet. What I mean, 577. The bottom of the gap was what, 574 or so. So look up 3 points. Is that close enough? Maybe. Maybe it depends on which part of a wick or something that you measured or something like that. Or we could be shaping up for a continuation down. Let me show you what I mean. However, we have not filled this gap yet, and that is kind of unnerving. Now, I'm going to expand my daily chart here. Why do I say that? Let me try to plot. What do we think the market is going to do moving forward? We filled these gaps, but we have not filled this gap completely yet. We do have some trend lines. We are on the bottom of the trend lines. It did break below that trend, which is kind of scary, and came back up and pulled back down. Why is that scary? You ever heard of a breakout and retest? Is this a breakout and this is a retest? If so, are we going to continue down until we fill this gap? Yeah, I think I had my charts marked wrong. I thought the gap was filled. Started getting prepped for night. Same thing. Here's on the Qs. Here's that presidential gap. We're nowhere near that. So, did I look at it wrong? Or are we in for a really bad time ahead of? Hey, we're holding trend. This thing on futures, I don't trade against the trend. So the trend says we're bullish. But we haven't filled these gaps yet. Everything, all the other gaps we filled. Here's a gap here, filled. Here's a gap here, filled. Gap here, filled. Gap down, filled. So all the gaps are filled, except this big one. On both the Qs and SPY. I don't tell you that's scary. I'm just here to give you some education on what gaps are. But we've come down and we have filled this gap. To create this gap on the process, we've come up and filled that gap. We've come down and filled this gap. So what about this? Are we just going to leave that behind? Ignore it? Or is this a breakout, retest, and then come Monday, is it going to dump again? That is the $1 million question. Zoom out on a weekly. What do we look like on a weekly? Yeah, kind of in between the trend. But we're getting suspiciously a lot of weak buyers. Where's the bottom of this trend? What's the monthly look like? Yeah, really can't tell. I'm going to draw a trend line. Yeah, it's kind of hard to do. But another thing that's kind of scary, I noticed, if we go to SPY, and we go to the yearly, that's pretty freaking scary. Anybody who's ever traded penny stocks, when you get a stock that begins to go parabolic often there is a pretty substantial correction. Are we due for a substantial correction? There's 2028. Of course, we had 2018 going into COVID or so. I say with COVID or so. Pretty parabolic. We could be in for a rude awakening come January. What? Who knows? Like I said, this psychological idea is that all gaps get filled. It's only a matter of time we find out if that holds true or not. With that, thank you guys for checking this stuff out. Appreciate it. I'm gonna try to get some more content up for you guys, and I guess I will see you on the next one.